Welcome, good morning, the Connected Worlds track. So, yeah, my name's Lorna Goulden, and as you heard, I'm coming more from the creative side. So my story today is going to be about the Internet of Things, innovation, and one of my favorite topics, disruption, but very much from the human perspective. So I like to quote Eric Schmidt from Google that there's something about humans that technologists always forget, that humans are creative and unpredictable. So the Internet of Things. It's been hyping now for a couple of years, and I think most people are familiar with the big numbers that we're hearing about, the amount of things that are going to be connected to the Internet. 50 billion, 75 billion, lots of discussion. But what does that actually mean? Now, one thing it does mean is enormous amounts of data. Predictions, again, a 10-fold increase in data. We're seeing 35 billion petabytes of data, an exponential increase. But again, I asked, so what does that actually mean? Well, one thing I think it means in terms of the Internet of Things is although we talk about the things, we're actually seeing a lot of value coming from this data that's being gathered, that's being stored, that's being analyzed, that's giving us insights. When we're talking about value creation, I like to simplify this in 3 different types of value. Now, the first one, in a way, this is the one that people find the easiest to understand, the easiest to implement, because it's looking at what we currently do at the moment. And it's looking at what we're familiar with, making that better, making it faster, making it less risky, more flexible and faster. But really, if we want sustainable innovation, I think everyone will agree, we need to also look at developing completely new products and services so we can actually incrementally increase our revenue growth rather than just cutting costs. But one of the areas where I think the Internet of Things is going to really help us have some interesting innovation growth is in improving users' experience. So generating insights that can actually help people to be more empowered in the systems that they're using, more deeper levels of personalization. And of course, the real value creation is going to be when you can combine all of these 3 different types together. And from my perspective, while we have the things and we have the data, I think it's particularly important to also start looking at the role of people within these systems, and also about the value that we're creating for people with the Internet of Things, with data and with control. Because I have a feeling when we're innovating with the Internet of Things that we do need to start to think differently. And we need to actually start thinking about creating differently. If we're going to be creating an Internet of Things in a future that people actually want, people actually feel comfortable in. So to give a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about, I'd like to share with you a tool that I use to try and get a picture of what's happening in the world at the moment. More generally in the world of the Internet of Things and connected digitalisation. And I sometimes like to say this is giving a little bit of a glimpse inside the creative person's mind. Because this is what we do all the time. We're looking at what's going on in the world and putting things together and creating patterns. And what we're doing with this is actually getting a sense, a model of what's happening in a particular domain. Now here I'm looking at the Internet of Things. Now on the one side we have this sensing ability. The ability to gather data, gather information. But from the human perspective, what this is actually giving us as people is insight. Insight into our bodies, into our environment, our cities, and our planet. On the other side, of course, we also have the ability to control. Automatically switching, controlling remotely or manually. But from a human perspective, what this is enabling us to do is to actually influence our environment. And so by looking at all of these hundreds of different examples and actually having to update this very rapidly because things are moving incredibly fast, it's interesting to start to see the impact that different developments may be having. And in particular, how people's behavior might be changing. whether that's users, stakeholders, but also companies and brands. And start to see where new value is being created, but also, very importantly, where potentially value might be being destroyed. And one of the most important questions, instead of what and how, is particularly important to ask why. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dive into a couple of areas on this map, just give you a little bit of a sense of how I see the interaction between technology and people in the way that we develop these systems. Now, one of my favorite areas, as I said earlier, disruption. And what we're talking here about really is about the introduction of new products, new services, or business models, things that are really challenging the status quo. And I really like this quote from Colin Angle from iRobot, where he's talking about the vacuum cleaner and this image that we had of this humanoid pushing the robot, which actually created potentially an expectation that may have set back the industry as everybody was trying to create this perfect humanoid robot, rather than looking at actually what the goal was, what we're trying to achieve. And I like this as an example to raise the question is, what is our mindset or our image or our expectation of the world that we're living in at the moment? And how might this be coloring how we're developing our technological systems to help build this world or improve on this world? So let's have a look at some of the more famous disruptors at the moment. So we have Airbnb, Uber, Alibaba, and I think many people are probably now familiar with the story that's going around about, Uber, for example, founded in 2008, now considered one of the largest taxi companies in the world without actually owning any taxis. Facebook not owning any of its own content. Alibaba also not owning any of its inventory. And we can go on. And of course, one of the things that's really important with their business is the data, the information they're gathering, the insights they're generating, and how this is enabling, in a way, to battle for the customer interface. Well, one of the things I like to point out about these, what are called hyperscale companies, thinking of Google and Amazon as well, is they're no longer sticking within one industry domain. So Google, of course, moving into the home, connecting up to the car. Amazon also moving into the home. We've got Alibaba moving into the smart home in the city. Apple moving into the car. So it's interesting for the established organizations who do remain in one industry as to how can they actually prevent themselves from being potentially Ubered out of existence. And one of the ways is to actually rethink the way that innovation is done. Rather than doing everything internally, to actually start connecting and using things that are already being made available, such as APIs. And I like these as an example in the connection with the Internet of Things, and I kind of simplistically look at these as being the bridge between the things on the one hand and the amazing capabilities of the cloud and the analytics to actually create the value and the insight from that information. But again, it's something that's only really possible now because of this once-in-a-generation convergence of megatrends with the Internet of Things, with cloud, and with mobile. And what we have with these databases of thousands of available APIs is they're turning these rather limited little things into powerful networks of possibilities. Now, of course, we've got enormous amounts of data that's also being gathered, a lot of it being made open. A lot of it from the sensors, very much quantitative data. But of course, we've got another source of data that's coming from people, social media data. And a couple of years ago, I was in London for a workshop looking at sentiment mapping. Could this information, real-time insight into how people were feeling in London, be actually used to develop an app where people could plan their travel to be much more positive, avoiding areas where people were getting frustrated? They're currently running a pilot, and I have no idea at the moment how that's developing. But it's an interesting idea. I was particularly inspired also by this development in the US, using Twitter as a source of information for earthquake warning. One of the most notable things about this is that there's a possibility that the messages can actually reach areas where there are no sensors. So one of the most important parts of this system is actually the people, the critical mass of people creating the messages and also having the mobile devices. And another example, in a similar way, with the FireChat app in the Philippines, and they're looking at this as being a potential resilient communication network, particularly in times of a major national disaster where traditional communication networks go down. This sort of mesh communication network, again requiring a critical mass of people, or they actually have these Bluetooth devices to fill the gaps, can actually be a free communication network to keep things running whilst the traditional network goes down. But again, a couple of examples where we're seeing the value of people within the system and not just the system for the people. But I think it's also then something important to touch upon when we're talking particularly about this data that's being created by people or about people, the issue of privacy on the terms of the data, but also on the ethics of the terms of the people using this data. And this research by Trusty that was carried out a couple of years ago in the US and the UK, looking at who people trust with the data that's being generated from their smart devices. And there's no surprises, I think, that at the closest trust circle is going to be your spouse or your close family members. And on the far outside, we have advertising companies, and we also have the government. But we see at the moment, I think there's a general consensus of opinion, could be changing, but generally speaking, this data is an enormous gold mine. It's an asset. But there is an alternative point of view that rather than being an asset, it can actually be a liability. Particularly if your business model is advertising, where every time your users are having a transaction with you, they're giving away a little bit of privacy. What you're actually doing is potentially breaking down the trust relationship. And the trust relationship, in the end, may be more sustainably important than the advertising business model, is the question. And we do see that there is actually a gradual, not quite exponential rise, but definitely increasing in ad blocking. So it's becoming technically possible now for people to have a say in what's happening with the systems and the information being presented to them. So it's raising questions about that business model. And of course, I think here in Europe, we're all aware.
Do I think that data privacy...
Oops, sorry, one bad. We're all aware about privacy, but I think there's, again, a general feeling that most people don't care. If you look at the information people are putting online, putting on social media. And I would like to argue that rather than not caring, that it's maybe a case of people not being fully aware. So I'd just like to show this short video.
Is a serious issue. It's not like on the front of my mind.
I think we are pretty secure.
I don't feel too threatened. So I'm just like, allow. I agreed to let this app change my device's call log, including incoming and outgoing calls data. So why would they want to change my call log? Do you have any idea?
I allowed this app to record audio at any time without my confirmation. That's pretty terrible.
This may allow the app to share or save my calendar data regardless of confidentiality or sensitivity. It's offensive.
I give this app permission to modify calendar events and send emails without my knowledge.
I give the app permission to read my text messages.
Read my text messages?
Read my text messages. What?
I allow this app to modify my contacts.
To modify my contact.
Modify my contacts. That's scary.
I give this app permission to read my personal profile information. Ugh.
Give the app permission to use my precise location. It's not something that I think anybody else needs to know.
I agree to let this app automatically turn off airplane mode.
Turn off airplane mode.
Is that real? That's insane.
I give this app permission to read all data about calls on my device. Yeah, that's up.
Why would they do that?
That I'm actually kind of surprised about.
And these are real?
Is that true? Oh my God.
Oh, thank you for alerting me to all this really bad.
I feel like I'm giving over my life to an app.
I should probably start to read these things.
So I think it's good to think twice about the assumption that many people don't care about their privacy. And of course, here in Europe, we're going to see some big changes now. I think everybody's familiar with the countdown to GDPR and the big impact that's potentially going to have. Data privacy by design, by default, the right to be forgotten, breach notification within 72 hours, enormous fines for not complying with many of the different regulations. It's going to be extremely interesting to see the impact that this is going to have. But it's also interesting to see it from the point of view of a global perspective. It's a very culturally laden aspect, privacy and ethics. So if you look over at China, there's a very different viewpoint. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with the social credit system that is being implemented at the moment. It's due to be, I think, up and running in 2020. Every citizen being tracked in everything that they do, similar to the financial credit, but it's more a social credit. Are you actually fitting the mold of the perfect citizen? And it's being very, very much welcomed, apparently. And then if we look the other side, we see the larger American organizations have a feeling that this protection in Europe is actually going to really hinder innovation. And I think it's a very valuable discussion to have what the impact is going to be. I would like to think that it could actually inspire innovation. So for example, we see this year Philips has launched their blockchain laboratory, where they're partnering with people who are interested in developing blockchain technology with medical healthcare information. So I see this as actually inspiring a new type of innovation. And I, for one, have to say I'm actually rather glad that I live in Europe. So I'm going to move away now from the privacy and ethics and just zoom into a couple of areas of more specific domains of Internet of Things. Wearables. How many people have got a smartwatch on? Quite a few. How many people have got an activity tracker? Is there anybody here who's had an activity tracker and kind of stopped using it after a few months? Ah, more of those. Okay. So I think you probably know where I'm going here. So 2014 was absolutely, was hailed as the year of the wearable. We saw a massive increase in startups, in companies. Pebble did incredibly well with their Kickstarter. I actually got the Pebble because I had this kind of certain cynicism about what is the real value. And as a designer, I think, well, let's just try it out, and I can see whether it's valuable or not. And it works really well as a presentation timer. But of course, as time went by, they started to see a pattern. People were losing interest after a few months. And I think it's important to then ask, well, why? Because the quantification was actually starting to get better. We have all these different apps. We have possibilities of sharing your activity data. The Google Glass, I mean, it was just so cool, but somehow it didn't manage to maintain interest in a sustainable way. This might be one of the reasons why. I think it was a very interesting recent study where, while the quantification can actually encourage people to do more activity, if you're actually quantifying an activity, a leisure activity you enjoy, you may actually take away the enjoyment. And it starts to become a chore. It feels like work. And in the end, people may even actually stop doing that activity. So if you're a leisure runner, jogger, walker, I think the advice here is don't track it. Enjoy it. And for me, the message that jumps out here is, people are much more than quantification of movements and activities. The things that people value a lot of the time are very qualitative. So how can the Internet of Things play a role in actually connecting up to that aspect of people? Move to the smart home. And we see a similar-ish pattern emerging here. So we saw a presentation last year by Scott Jensen, who's leading the physical web project at Google. And he has his kind of favorite smart home scenario, where you have your alarm clock connects to your calendar, and it knows it can wake you up half an hour later. And as you get downstairs, the coffee machine is already bubbling with the fresh coffee. And as he says, I hate this scenario with the heat of 1,000 suns. Is this all we're going to be bringing with this technology, saving me 5 minutes in my day, ignoring the fact that I may have a natural rhythm every morning which wakes me up without an alarm clock? I like to talk about the smart fridge. Is anybody here got a smart fridge? I've been asking this question now probably about 5 or 6 years, and I've had so far one person put their hand up, but I'm not sure if they were telling the truth because they ran away afterwards, so I couldn't actually ask them about it. And this is the scenario that I hate with the heat of 1,000 suns. But it fascinates me that it's one of the ones that's very often quoted by journalists when they're trying to explain to the general public what the internet thinks is going to bring to us. And it seems I'm not the only one who looks at this with a certain amount of cynicism. I mean, are you going to pay $5,000 for a fridge that has a full-size screen on the door so you don't have to open the door anymore to see what's in it? It does a lot of other things as well. I'm maybe being a little bit too cynical. But yeah, I think my reservations are shared. But again, why is this not really grabbing people's attention? Recent research in the Netherlands, for example, discovered that there are now about 300,000 people that have a robot vacuum cleaner. And I think they barely reached about 4% of people who either had or were interested in having a connected appliance. Why is this? And if we see a lot of the visions of the smart home, it comes back, I think, to those value creation, 3 different value creations I talked about earlier. What we're doing at the moment is we're looking at what we have, predominantly things that are connected to the electricity, and we're saying, well, let's connect that to the internet as well. We'll make it smart. And then we'll work out what to do with it. Instead of maybe looking the other way around and saying, well, what is the home? What do we have? Particularly looking in the context of the home. And I like this example, the Samsung TV, where after they launched it, they then had to warn people, you might not want to have personal conversations in front of your TV, because that might be taken and shared with unknown third parties. So don't put the TV in your bedroom. But that's not to say that speech is not an interesting interaction interface. I think we're probably all now very aware of the, I think, rather surprising hit of the Amazon Echo. Unfortunately, not available yet in Europe, although you can actually download the instructions to build it on Raspberry Pi. But the thing that struck me here is that when you see the reviews, which are predominantly positive, these are also reviews of people that have had it for about 6 months. So unlike the wearable where everyone got excited and then sort of it drifted off, interest in Amazon Echo seems to be increasing over time. So I'm going to be curious to see how that develops. And they're, of course, adding lots more different apps. They're moving into controlling the car. So it's a question about, why does one gather people's interest and gain people's interest, and why doesn't the other? Because people are quite difficult to predict. And also, I think in the home context, it's not about making things more efficient. It's not more about functionality. It's about the relationships between people. But again, you have to be very careful as to how you then translate that into a technological solution. And I love this kind of provocative video from Superflux, looking at what happens when this gentleman's children decided they wanted to help care from a distance.
Northwest 5 or 6, wintry showers, good, occasionally poor. North at Sierra, south at Sierra, east 40s, variable 4 becoming southeasterly 5 or 6, west 40s, Cromarty, 4th, Tyne, west Dogger.
Noel Wiley, no red line for you as your high scores, but let's see, Noel Wiley, is it right? How many
So capture all on here, 254.
No, I think you probably will. I mean, it comes down. I tell you what, you've got several years of some of those.
Okay.
I can hardly rate
You do the pointless thing of making up names. That stacks the odds against me.
Yeah, I'm thinking Brown's
Now in winter, the sharks are focusing all their attention on the offshore islands, full of young seals. By watching how the sharks hunt here, Alison has learnt what time of day an attack is most likely.
Here is the general synopsis at 0700 GMT. Cow in sea area Shannon moving slowly eastwards and filling. Sorry, that should be low in sea area Shannon. And now the area reports. Viking, northward Sierra, southward Sierra, rain at times, good. Westerly becoming cyclonic, good. Humber, Thames, Bedford, Leyland, Daff, Dover, Seoul, Hake, rain at times, good. White, Portland, Plymouth.
Now, subway systems from around the world. Will you either tell us in which city systems, please? Best of luck. Okay, let's reveal our 5 subway systems, and here they come. We have got that made you think Paris. New York City from Andy and Juliet. 50. David and Rachel are going to say. Is it going to be 15 though? That's 7. Very well done indeed. To be honest, I think this is so many films and what have you, isn't it? Now, A is London.
Shink of light getting inside the telescope. The astronauts had to get the latch to lock.
If you copy, Jeff's just working, putting the doors back together and thinks he needs to close the gap. And we're going to press on. If you've got a way to do it, do it.
Trap and a ratchet. Floating Story Musgrave improvised a solution. It was a success. The astronauts were elated.
I think this is a great way of highlighting the creativity of people, and actually you can get a great pleasure out of, thwarting the system. So bear that in mind as to what people might do with the systems they're presented with and how they might get around things. So I'm just going to finish now by sort of zooming out a little bit onto the larger domain of the cities. And this is really an area, a domain with an economy of scale that does make it particularly interesting. And we're seeing a lot of great developments with resource management, with smart grids, where it's really making a difference with respect to sustainability. And the other particular value for the city, quality of life. But again, I see a sort of repeat in the pattern and have to question as to what is the image of the city that is actually driving these visions, that's driving the technology developments. Is it predominantly driven by people who are responsible for maintaining the city, who are responsible for the efficiency and the cost? Or is it driven by technology companies? And what happens if people get more actively involved in the vision of the city and how the technology might actually impact and improve their lives? A great example of this is the Things Network. How many people here are familiar with the Things Network? A couple of people. It's actually started as a local initiative here in Amsterdam. A couple of guys decided with a community to build a LoRaWAN network. And I'm just going to show the video that they created when they launched a Kickstarter campaign with the idea to enable their mission for this free-to-use, crowdsourced Internet of Things city network to actually go global.
Imagine an Internet of Things data network that's created by the people and free and open for everyone to use. That's our mission at the Things Network. We are a group of people that is building a global, crowdsourced, open, free Internet of Things data network. New technologies allow for things to connect to the Internet without Bluetooth, 3G or Wi-Fi. This technology is called LoRaWAN. It's very battery efficient, so devices can last up to 3 years. It's long range, it has a reach of around 10 kilometers, and it's low bandwidth, ideal for the Internet of Things. The good thing is that this network can be built at a fraction of the cost of traditional mobile data networks. The bandwidth used by LoRaWAN is open, and the network equipment is low cost. In the old world, building such a network was up to large corporations. We built the network ground up, funded by its users. So with a small group of people, it's possible to provide data connectivity for an entire city. It's our mission to support that globally. The city of Amsterdam was covered in 4 weeks, and use cases were built on top of that, starting from the first day.
And it's an inspiring mission. So I was actually inspired after I heard of the launch of the Amsterdam Things Network to set up a meetup in the city in the south of the Netherlands in Eindhoven. And also within the space of 4 weeks, with members from the community, we also got this rather smaller city covered by this LoRaWAN network. And it's now spreading, and I believe there are 100 different locations around the world joining this community and building this open IoT network. And of course the question is, well, what are we going to do with it? And it's quite exciting because it's very early days. So we've been going now for a few months, and the first meetups have really been about tackling the technology challenges. And we've got an incredible mix of people. And for me, that was one of the exciting parts and one of the inspiring parts. Because what makes a city interesting and exciting are the people. And I love this way of describing it. It's about the collision density, the opportunity to actually meet with people who think differently. And so with this meetup, we're bringing together creative people, designers, hardware people, software people, a very different range of people also from the city administrators. And we're just starting to raise the question, well, if we can do whatever we want, what might we do? And I have to say that question is easier said than done. So we've got the technologies being developed as we're actually starting to think of what we're going to do with it. The Kickstarter is going to be delivered in July, so we're going to get more gateways, we're going to get nodes, the whole back end is going to be ready. It's not even ready for us really to use yet. So what we're doing is also running workshops using design thinking tools to start from the other side of the equation is we have the technology, but what would we like to do with it as citizens, as creatives, as people? And inspired by the current driving visions for the smart city, quality of life. Now I have to apologize to perhaps being a little cynical when I question whether having a faster way of parking your car is really improving your quality of life. What I'd like to do, and what we did with the workshop, is actually start from Toronto Research Unit model on quality of life, where we're talking about being, belonging, and becoming as a person in the environment, and how much time you have to spend on that, and how much you're actually enjoying and valuing those aspects. And also sustainability. Stretch that one to go beyond purely resource sustainability, resource management, looking also at natural resources, but also looking at urban resources, and also human resources in a city as being very important. Creativity, health and well-being. So we took these as a starting point, and with groups of people that turned up in a weekend in their free time, started brainstorming using experience scenarios, getting into the shoes of the people in the city walking around saying, what does it mean to be, belong, or to become someone or something in this city? And also using maps of the city to start drawing, saying, what can we do, might we do with this technology? And some amazing ideas coming out of that were still in the early stages. So the idea is as the technology is developing, also looking at developing use cases. This one particularly caught my attention. It was actually a really large kind of system of ideas that went across the whole city, called the Serendipity City. But the reason I liked it was because we also had an artist in residence visiting the city who was working on a project in Colombia, in a park. And she actually got very excited about this whole idea. It was about bringing people together, about hiding information, a little bit of gaming, a little bit of history, a little bit about integration of different cultures. Lots of different ideas that were spread around the city. But she could also see that they had potential for a different place of the world in a different context. And so she's going to keep in contact. We'll be coming back later in the year, and maybe we can actually take the steps towards building it. But it's very early days, from sketch to building. But hopefully within the year, we're going to actually start getting something up and running, built by the people, with the people's ideas about what they want. A different way maybe of thinking about what can we do with the Internet of Things and what can it mean for us, building it ourselves. So I'd like to finish just with one thought, is that maybe it is time to start rethinking the way that we're developing these systems with the Internet of Things, and rather than always trying to automate people out, I'm not saying that's a bad direction to go in, sometimes it does make sense, but also looking at how we can actually integrate human qualities into the system. Human qualities that maybe cannot be replaced by technology. Critical thinking, ethics and trust, and also humor and fun and serendipity. Thank you. That was my closing comment, and I would love if anybody have any questions to get into a dialogue.
Hi, Lorna. Thank you very much. Yeah, is this on? Okay. Lorna, thank you very much for this inspiring talk about how we are transitioning from to a new connected world. And there are 3 questions for you from the public. One is that you showed us how ownership for companies is slowly transitioning from ownership of things to ownership of data and actually controlling the data. And the question is, how do you think this will transition in the near future?
That's actually an enormous question that I could probably take a long time to try and answer. We're going through different stages. So the first stage is really, yeah, indeed, the business model from sort of things to data or the combination. But of course now with the data privacy, it's raising the question of who actually owns the data and how you actually give access to that data. And so it's also looking at what is the value and how do you get the value out of the data. So there's maybe a little bit of rush at the moment of gathering enormous amounts of data. But I think the next step is really going to be seeing where is the value, how do we get out of that. So machine learning, ways of actually generating insights, but of course also working out who has those insights, who owns those insights, who has the ability to develop and control them. So we're heading into super interesting times, and it's going to be moving extremely fast.
And do you think that the legislation is going to adapt to that really quickly as well?
Well, European legislation is certainly going to be having an impact, and I don't think anybody really knows what that impact is going to be, how compliance is going to be monitored. But one of the things I sort of maybe optimistically like is the idea that people will have more of a say in their own data, more insight themselves, and insight into the insights that are being created from their data. And rather than that just being a control and transparency thing, I think that could even be a trigger for innovation, from co-creation, from people when they see the possibilities. They might actually have ideas of how it could be more useful to them.
Okay, thank you very much. And the next question is, which smart devices, well, I see that you were wearing a smartwatch yourself. How do you decide what smart devices that you use on yourself and in your home?
Right, well, I have to confess, my attic is kind of a graveyard of technology. So I do tend to love trying things out. But I've noticed the last few years that I almost got the Nest, for example. But once it was bought by Google, I don't, at the moment, buy any product where I see that advertising and data scraping is the business model. But then, for example, the Amazon Echo, I'm kind of intrigued to try it out because I see that people are enjoying the experience. And so from a creative point of view, I try things out which I see are succeeding. Or in the wearables front, I want to understand why things aren't succeeding. Okay. And I do also have the robot vacuum cleaner, and I love it.
Lastly, being in front of a room of technologists, if you could have one appeal for this public that they should consider in building their next Internet of Things solution, what would it be for you?
Well, actually, that's an interesting start to the question. Is this room only technologists? Do we have any designers in the room? Okay. And how many people would call themselves creative technologists? Quite a few. I think what I would say is to look at the role of being a technologist is actually something that's incredibly creative, and actually seek out what we're saying with the city, that collision diversity, maybe looking at different ways of thinking. Social sciences, design, creativity with creative technology is going to come up, I think, with some very interesting solutions.
Okay. One last question that just came in. Are we at a point where things are starting to own us more than, or vice versa?
Where things are starting to
Are we at a point where things are starting to are starting to own us, or that we are starting to own them?
I think it depends which part of the world you live in. As I mentioned, the difference with China, Europe, and America. But I am an eternal optimist, and I like to think that even though maybe the technology is trying to get a tighter grip, we do have big risks. I still believe in the creativity of people to find a way to make sure it doesn't get too bad.
Okay. Well, Lorna, thank you again, everybody. Great applause for Lorna Goulden.
Thank you.